as an image type, we can have an idea of actually being emotional in some sense, but there's a huge difference between this and what comes up from here. It's really profound to me that there was a time at which I actually discovered there's an autonomous heart organism within myself that is apart from all the stuff that I imagine myself to be.
Welcome to another episode of What It's Like to Be You. I am Josh Levine, your host. Today, my guest is Niklas Wilkens, and this show was just amazing to record. It was pretty mind-blowing for me from the point of view of just learning about what it's really like to be a two. I've never heard a two speak with such a high degree of precision about their own inner world, and from a place of having worked through enough of his stuff to be able to see it with very high fidelity. One orienting idea about type 2 for the newbies out there is that type 2, the passion of type 2 is pride. And what I mean by that is not a sense of like, I'm so cool, or a sense of taking pride in the work I do or anything like that. That's more 3 territory. The pride of 2 is more, I'm here for you. And any aspect of myself that doesn't conform to a self-image of being perfectly selfless, altruistic, offering everything from pure motivations of love, that is suppressed out of my consciousness, and I can only see the part of me that is loving. And it takes the virtue of the 2, humility, to welcome and see and accept all of the other parts of me, which my ulterior motives and my shadow and all these kinds of things. One other distinction that's going to be important for this episode, if you're new, is the idea of object relations. And I'm not going to give a very long thing on this, but the fundamental principle is that object relations is the most basic arrangement of the ego structure as the Enneagram defines it. There are 3 types of object relation: attachment, frustration, and rejection. Basically, why it's called object relations is when you're a baby, you, the subject, have a relationship with the primary objects of your life, usually the parents or other adult figures that are taking care of you. And that relationship between subject-object can take on certain qualities or affects. One is attachment, one is frustration, one is rejection. Attachment is the fundamental idea that I am trying to adapt myself to get mom or dad's attention. Frustration is, mom, you're kind of not doing it right. Dad, you're not doing it right. And if only I push the right button or convince you or squirm around enough, then maybe you'll do it right. And rejection is basically, I need something from mom, but she's not doing it for me correctly. And so instead of being frustrated, I basically just cauterize myself from needing it at all. It's like I cease to believe that what I once needed is on the table. And so I fundamentally surrender to a reality in which it's not available. Type 2 is a rejection type. And that piece of the Enneagram has always been interesting and a bit of a head scratcher for me, because it seems to me that they're sort of adapting in an attachment way to going out and meeting other people. And so that's something that we explore a lot in this conversation, and it was really, really revealing. Niklas has some really amazing stories about this, how he woke up to these patterns in himself, and I think this conversation really speaks for itself. So I'm going to leave it here. And without further ado, please welcome my friend, Niklas. Welcome, everyone, to another interview. I'm here with my new friend, Niklas. And Niklas is a humanistic depth psychologist who lives in Germany. He's been exploring the Enneagram for 14 years, and he uses it in his work with clients. And I think I'm just going to leave it there, actually, for now, because we have a lot to dig into. So, welcome.
Mm-hmm. Hi.
My favorite question up front is, what's it like to be introduced?
It's always a little funny because the orientation points you mentioned are a direction, but they never represent who I am in total, and that's fine. And so I'm just glad people know kind of broadly what to expect.
Yeah, cool. So when I started doing the show not too long ago, and you reached out to me on Facebook and said basically, hey, I've been working with the Enneagram for 14 years. I'm a psychologist. I can talk about being a 2 in high resolution. And our
Mhm.
first conversation was amazing, and you delivered on your promise. So I'm really excited to dig in and things about being a two as a rejection type and all these kinds of things. But I'd
Mhm.
love to start with just, can you share with us your Enneagram origin story, including all of the ways that you thought you were other types and how you discovered you were two and everything, all of the whole story.
All right. Okay. Um, I discovered the Enneagram within a course for nonviolent communication, which is an approach to foster human connection within oneself and to other people, and actually find and create intelligent solutions for differences. And those people had my trust. So I was open to an approach that upfront would have seemed to me like something pigeonholing people and reducing them to certain stereotypes. And I wouldn't have liked that if there wouldn't have been that background. And on one afternoon in California, I had this experience of um, being pointed out in certain qualities people have and differences, and it was for the first time that I actually could believe that people could see the world and themselves from a different angle. Up until then, I would have probably thought that they were lying if they didn't have the same problems as I had. I had
Uh huh.
this
That's
I had
that's
this
good.
idea and this image that actually everybody has these image problems, and everybody has, you know, everybody hides behind a mask and they don't really show up for who they actually are. Within my teenage years, I had been a fan of a radio show that's local to the area around my hometown, where people could call in the night from 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. and talk about everything anonymized. And that was something that to me seemed real. And and this realness was that's where I got the juice from. And actually, I assumed everybody is actually looking for that, and but they all never admit to it. And for with the Enneagram, it was plausible for me that there could be other type structures that actually create a different experience of oneself and the world. So that was the beginning. And I have a long journey of switching between perspectives on my type, and I have arrived on two around 2 years ago. And I think in the beginning I thought it was six, which is my hat fix. Um, then I thought four for a while, and then five, and I stuck with five for about 11 years or something.
That's a long time.
That's a long time, right?
Yeah.
And and then the 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 two came up within a therapy session where I read a section from Suzanne Stabile's book to a client of mine about the two. And when the client left the practice, I started to weep because Suzanne Stabile had described the experience with, she's a two herself, so that's got something to do with it probably. But she did it with a compassion and with a clarity that I hadn't heard anywhere else. And um, and the funny thing is also that from the perspective of my mistypings, when I looked at the Enneagram and how all these different types felt to me, the two was the one that which is a tell. I didn't think this is a type. I thought the two is what humans are actually like.
Wow. Interesting. Uh huh. Yes,
Okay,
I relate to this actually being a three from the three point of view.
okay.
Totally get it.
Yes.
Yes.
So I couldn't get my head around what the two structure would be apart from what I took to be basic description of human nature.
This is so good. Yeah, I totally
Okay?
get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So the mistyping has an influence on what you think the value of the Enneagram could be.
This is
Because if you
yeah.
think what the whole time I always thought, okay, uh, if I am a five, there are certain aspects of it that work, and the Enneagram can elucidate that and can describe who I am. And I think the way it did that was to describe the rejection dynamic.
Okay.
And apart from that, it's not very useful or not that useful. And only when I discovered that I am a two, I could see the whole power of it. I
Mm,
could feel it. Because then I could believe, okay, if two is actually a type structure, then it's not a description of basic human nature, but just an aspect of it. And then the other types are really, really different from that. And
mm,
and that is basically the journey that you have that I went through towards something where I could see, okay, if this is a type structure, what is basic human nature then? You know, the, and
yeah.
I cannot answer that question, but
Sure.
that's open. Yeah.
Was that question disorienting for you, or is it even now?
The question, what human nature is?
Yeah. Like, let me say it differently. This point you're
Mm-hmm.
making, I think, is really profound from the point of view of when we discover our type.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, that itself is what reveals that typology is real, because it
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah because it cuts out from the, to use a cliche, sort of the pie of human consciousness, like your own slice, and it's like, oh wow,
Yes.
it's actually
Yes.
possible to be another type.
Yes.
Where I totally relate to what you're saying. When I, even in the days after I discovered I was a three, um, still I think sneakily had a suspicion that everyone actually related to precisely my experience and was really hiding themselves in a certain way, like I
Mm-hmm.
had been.
Mm-hmm.
But then, to talk to an eight, for example, and just to realize that that's just not their issue, at all. Like, it's like they're a whole universe
Yes.
away. Um, it's fascinating. And then that question of basic human nature becomes, this is not an Enneagram question. I'm just curious from your point of view. Did that become
Yeah.
disorienting?
No, not really, because there are a couple of things that I learned from nonviolent communication that still help me orient myself today.
Okay.
And there are a couple of other um, frameworks that help, among them integral theory and various developmental theories that kind of frame how people relate to their basic human needs and values. And I think those needs and values are something that is universal, independent from type structure.
Sure.
But the way we approach them, the way we relate to our needs and values, the way we what we do to meet them or to protect what we have, those can be very different
Yeah.
and diverse.
Yeah.
So that orientation still stands, and discovering too helped me in a sense to wake up from bullshitting myself that this is the only way things can be. And there are a couple of other things that I had to stop bullshitting myself about because
Yeah.
those are core to the two type structure.
Like what?
Well, I couldn't convince myself anymore that everything I do is just out of selfless love.
Uh huh.
And that was really hard um, because believing in that image has a very stabilizing effect.
Yeah.
And when you stop believing, when you notice that this is bullshit or this is just a partial truth, then the stability falls away for a while. And when I discovered my type and I started weeping, I actually didn't stop until the end of the weekend. And that was about 3 to 4 days. And I was shaking because of this
Wow.
shit. I don't know what, uh, where's my foundation now?
Yeah.
And um, another aspect was that I had convinced myself I am, in a way, so special and apart that people need to be special themselves in order to be able to help me or nourish me.
Right.
And in a sense, that is still true because my sensitivity to what's going on is sometimes very challenging to people. And within the framework of my own family, I've been very difficult sometimes to get along because I mean I on the one hand I get along very well with people, but that's within my type structure. And when I want to break out of that, I confront people with what I observe and what I don't like, and um, and that can be very challenging because it's usually something that people would have to start reflect on themselves so they can give me an answer that is actually um, uh, sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's stuff like you looked satisfied there, but I don't think you really were. What's actually going on?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
probing
Yeah.
questions that have to do with my six fix, where I start to doubt or I express my doubts about what's actually going on and try to get a clear perception of the situation. And um, yeah, so I need somebody who's able to meet me there. And but that played into the two structure in the sense that my needs are somehow special and people need to go way longer than usual in order to meet me. And
Yeah.
there was a certain kind of pride in that too. You know, I'm able to provide that for other people, but they are not able to provide that for me. And there's a profound sadness in that, which is also something that came up when I realized it, because it's very isolated in a way.
Yeah. This is we're getting into the territory of two as a rejection type. I just want to name that.
Hmm.
And real quick,
Right.
can you frame up your whole typing? Social self
Yeah.
pres. Go ahead.
I'm social self-pressed, right? Two wing three is
Yeah.
probably the heavier wing,
Mm-hmm.
and the trifix is 269.
Yeah. Okay. And so this idea of being a rejection type, this is something that was really fascinating to me in our original conversation around maybe just to frame up my own point of confusion because I think it might be instructive is it's like how is the two not an attachment type? It's like they're trying to get in there with
Hmm.
people, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And they're reading needs and stuff like that in a way that I sort of think on the surface that I can relate to. You know,
Hmm.
I'm also reading people, and this is partly the
Hmm.
social lens. This is also being an image type and
Hmm.
being sensitive to how
Hmm.
people are reading me and all
Hmm.
that stuff. But
Hmm.
some distinctions you made around, like, actually, I'd love for you to just your language is really precise about this, so I'd love to just hand the
Hmm.
mic over to you. How do you experience being a rejection type?
Well, the interesting paradox I perceive about two is that the whole awareness circles around love while actually not being able to connect,
Uh huh.
which also could be construed as attachment to disconnect. And I've been wondering about this too.
Yeah.
Especially when I see my trifix with 6 and 9 in it, and okay, there is a lot of attachment in it.
Yeah.
But the difference is, as I see it, is when as a two, I relate to people. I focus on where is the juice? Where is the vulnerability in the other person? What can I offer to that vulnerability?
Yeah.
And it gets really interesting when I meet other twos, because
Yeah,
that
I bet.
doesn't that that doesn't
It,
work there,
uh,
because they do the same thing, and they um, project also an image of somebody who's really interested in love and in connecting to my stuff, and at the same time not being really there. Or, as I like to put it, there's a wall that only becomes apparent when you actually try to get close to the two. When you get to a certain closeness, then something shuts off, and there's a numbness to it also. And um, the numbness has to do with, um, well, at least I can speak for myself, with being scared of the experience of not having any resonance. So if I were to open my heart, if I were to express what's inside and what's vulnerable within me, the expectation is there's nobody there, nobody home. I talk, I express, I relate, and the other person is practically not there. And within my inner work, I've come so far as to recognize that that must have been my experience as a child. And I must have decided that I won't go there anymore,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
and rather focus on serving the vulnerabilities of the other person, and letting warmth and love flow there. And the secret hope is that the flow of love will be reflected back to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
There's a paradox. I think I just want to put my finger on here because it's like this this very preciously held desire for love and connection, and also the absolute. I'm going to use the word suspicion. It's just not
mhm,
strong enough, though. That it could exist at all. It's like
right,
this is part of the rejection dynamic. I think is
yes,
not actually believing that it's on the table.
exactly.
But there's this funny hopefulness or something in the two, or at least it seems that way. It's like this is part of the two's automaticity. It's like I still go out to you anyway. I don't believe that it's possible, but I'm going to just go out to you
Exactly.
anyway.
Yes, yes, yes. That's the paradox. And within my internal space, I like to call this the hope machine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes
And
sense.
the hope machine is sucking up every part of hint or evidence that could point to this could actually happen, this connection. But it's more like I gather evidence and evidence and evidence, but I don't start to open up myself to actually be able to experience it
Right.
until I become consciously aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, up until the point where I think, becoming aware of my type structure was very important for this, because without grasping this paradox, it was actually not possible to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
If you had asked me, so what's your relationship to love and connection, then I would have said, I'm all for it. I'm the expert. And I recall, I am in a long process with a woman that touched me very deeply at
Yeah.
this spot without me having no clue how she did it. And the journey is about finding that out too. And I recall a point at which she confronted me, and I I actually said, I think I'm the expert. I know how this works. I know how you address needs and how you try to figure out, using nonviolent communication, for example, uh, how can we resolve differences and all that. But I overlooked the difficulty I have with receiving it.
Mm-hmm.
And also people who are in that position of trying to show me their love can feel very insecure because of that, because the resonance doesn't happen. And then they do
Interesting.
not sense that they actually arrived here.
Uh-huh.
And when that creates insecurities, my type structure can react with pushing in more love and pouring it more, and
Wow.
it's all like a desperate attempt to create this reflection that I was referring to. It's you pour out love and then something comes back.
Yeah. And what's the
And
thing that comes back? Or sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. If you're on the flow,
yeah,
yeah.
well, but that's the point. What comes back is hopefully
Uh huh.
the same kind of love that I poured out,
Yeah.
with the advantage from the point of view of the type structure. The advantage is I don't have to notice my own pain around this issue.
Okay.
It circumvents my the need for actually opening up, and that's what twos avoid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they avoid to to confront the hopelessness and despair about not really believing that love and connection are actually possible.
Yeah. It's, that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. Sounds horrifying.
It's horrifying, it is, and therefore the it can feel like an addiction to love other people. It can feel like, uh, oh, I just want to get to the juice. I just want to see your sweet vulnerability and cater to that, and help you discover it and help you love it too, because that way I can feel the juice without having to go into my own
Yeah.
despair.
Yeah. This
Okay.
brings a lot of clarity to why. I mean, just speaking to the difficulty of receiving someone else's love. It's like if someone if someone pierces through that membrane or image or whatever you would call it that protects that inner space, it just feels like even the slightest touch of that would be overwhelming from the point of view of, um, I mean, it just shatters the entire worldview that this isn't possible. You know what I'm saying? And
Exactly.
yeah, not only that, but also to get through that membrane itself, you have to push through the, um, what? There's some word that it's like, it's like schematically almost. Here's where I'm at. It's like there's this there's this very deeply unconsciously held belief that this isn't possible. Someone pushes through the membrane to get inside and runs up, by necessity runs up against that pain, that hopelessness. And so the very act of someone else loving you triggers that hopelessness,
Exactly.
and to get past it, um, you have to kind of I don't know what, like, what's it like for you if someone when someone gets past it, or the process of someone even trying.
I love that question. um, I've run into big trouble time and again when that happened,
Mm-hmm.
because the the unconsciously held belief that love and connection are impossible also protects me from feeling that despair.
Yeah.
And when somebody manages, however that happened, and sometimes or most of the time I really didn't notice it, or I couldn't actually grasp it, and that was disorienting too. when that happens, what I need is attention, awareness, empathy for the pain. It's like, okay, now you have penetrated the membrane. Now I am actually in touch with what's behind it. And now this is like an explosion of feeling of anger, of disappointment, of yearning, of sometimes lust too. And where do I get the space where this can be held?
Yeah.
And the instinctive reaction would be, please help me hold that
Uh-huh.
to the other person
Sure. Uh-huh.
who actually managed to penetrate the membrane.
Yeah.
So this would be the first person that I would address with that. And usually they were not prepared for that. So that was really tricky because, it was again this disappointment of, okay, now you see me, now I actually get to feel myself, and again there's no space for me to unpack this
Wow.
and to
Yeah.
actually discover it and feel it and name it. and
Mm-hmm.
and this has been the theme within my own therapy that I do for
Mm-hmm.
my own
Mm-hmm.
development, uh, where slowly this space, this conscious space, could be expanded, so that I can do that myself.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that I am not dependent on the person who penetrates the membrane to also hold the space for everything that's behind it.
Uh-huh.
But that's been a difficult journey, as you can imagine.
I can imagine. Yeah. I just want to name a couple things I'm
Mm-hmm.
resonating with as an image type.
Mm-hmm.
For me, there's also like if someone penetrates through, it's a different quality of image or energy that I'm projecting that someone has to kind of penetrate through to see into the gooey, exposed single heart nerve. That if someone touches it, it's like it feels like some infant part of me that
Mm-hmm.
um, that's so sensitive. I mean, it's more sensitive than anything else in me. I mean, if you think about like a
Exactly.
parts work system, it's like this is the I don't know 4-month-old baby or something that is it's just so utterly raw. And I also relate to if someone shatters through the image and then exposes that and then there I am, if they don't have the capacity to be with me in that state, then it actually re-triggers the whole type structure,
Yes.
and then
Exactly.
the whole like what was shattered reconstitutes and glues
Right.
itself back together, and then there I am.
Exactly.
I mean, and it might take an hour because having been shattered takes a minute to reconstitute.
Mm-hmm.
But it almost feels like there's something just absolutely existential and essential that kind of wants to happen there from the point of view of that relationship. And what I mean, so, and I'm curious to hear your point of view from this as a
Mm-hmm.
therapist. It's like it kind of feels like, yeah, on the one hand, there's the relationship I have to that part.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the continued disappointment that someone else can't be there with me while that part is triggered or can't be with that part. And
Mm-hmm.
I've had conversations with, for example, other coaches or therapists who I've gotten really close to as friends.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this funny thing that happens in coaching. Coach friendships are very
Mm-hmm.
funny
Yes.
because,
Yeah.
sometimes we accidentally slip into coach mode with each other and we're kind of open
Yeah.
to it in a certain sense. Or at
Yes.
least maybe, here's a way to put it, making this about me now. I'll go ahead and keep going for a second. It's like, as a three, I have this image of, oh, I'm a person who does inner work. And so if someone presents to me like a coaching prompt, then in that moment, if I'm not watchful of myself, I sort of slip into like, oh, I'm a good patient mode. And then boom, this thing is shattered. what's happened in a couple of situations is um, if the person keeps pushing and I've been shattered, then it actually ends up being trust destructive for me. And
Yeah.
you know, and I've had to have
Yeah.
conversations with people where if that happens, if I go there, then
Yeah.
I need you to pump the brakes and just like hold me,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
there's something about like there's some deep therapeutic point I'm trying to make here around. On the one hand, there's the relationship I have with my own part, but there's also the hope or the potential, the therapeutic potential of having someone else be there with me too.
Yes. I would like to respond with an image I like to use for these kind of processes where intense emotions come up, and there's this sort of holding capacity that we have for what's coming up. And this capacity is not fixed. I think it's both subject to development, it can grow, and according to our daily state, it can vary as well. And when somebody penetrates that membrane, as we said, and probes into the both juicy and vulnerable and sometimes undefined stuff that comes up,
Sure. Uh-huh.
then there's a limitation of what we can digest at a time.
Yeah.
And if somebody doesn't respect that limitation, and by respect I also mean is aware of,
Mm-hmm.
I've been in the situation you just talked about,
Yeah.
both as a coach and a coachee,
Uh-huh.
where I went beyond that threshold and pushed because I wanted to make a point or I
Yeah.
wanted to get things clearer. And I've also been on the other side mm, where there was an agenda in my counterpart,
Mm-hmm.
and that went beyond what I was able to digest at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the digestion is when the actual real emotions come up. And I say that within the framework of an image type, because as an image type we can have an idea of actually being emotional in some sense, but there's a huge difference between this
Uh-huh.
and what comes up from here.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really profound to me that there was a time at which I actually discovered there's an autonomous heart organism within myself
Amazing.
that is apart from all the stuff that I imagine myself to be.
Oh my God. Totally. Yeah. It's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful, yeah, it's beautiful language for it.
And one instance where this came up was with birthdays. I
Mm.
have a lot of trouble organizing my birthdays,
Mm-hmm.
because birthdays, I don't have to offer anything on birthdays other than myself. So within the framework of rejection time, we can say this is I don't know what to do with that. Um, and the last time I was talking about this to a very good friend of mine, and he is a therapist as well, so we have that kind of relationship you were
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
And um, and he wanted to be with me on my birthday, and he pushed me to actually get clear on what I want there. And he was so charming because he started with, okay, so if I hear you correctly, you would actually want to use the motto "I'm not there" on your birthday. Yeah.
Okay.
And I noticed, okay, my heart says yes to that. Yeah, yeah, that would be great. I'm not there. I don't want to be there.
Wow.
So, and from there I could actually feel into how it feels like to be valued and cherished for being myself, and that people are willing to come just because of that. And what I've discovered throughout the years is that this is so scary to me, because on my birthdays, when people do not come or have any kind of reason for not coming, it really feels like a rejection from outside, and I'm vulnerable. I cannot protect myself anymore because I cannot tell myself there's something else going on. I make this immediately about me, and I don't want to experience that, and that's why I don't like birthdays. And the emotion that comes up on those instances is way different from what I usually experience. It's raw and it's intense, and there are there are aspects to it that I don't know how to name, and so it's overwhelming. And in within a
Yeah.
therapeutic context, it's very important to keep track of that, to keep track of how much is the conscious awareness right now able, willing, and ready to digest,
Yeah. Yeah.
because there's a limit to it.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um. Okay. Slightly different question, but similar topic.
Mhm.
One of the things that I'm curious about how you relate to as a two and as a two in a as a two therapist
Mhm.
is how do you experience the two impulse or compulsion you might say to go in and sort of get be inside the psychological space of other people um and let's see the question I'm really trying to ask is um what do you need to watch in yourself to be
Mhm.
careful of?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
There's one issue around being a therapist that helped me a lot with that, and that is I'm trying to get the the English word. I have the German in mind. Um, it's like you have to get an assignment from somebody. They have to have give you, they have to tell you what they want,
Mm-hmm.
and this has to be conscious, because when the client doesn't tell me what this is about, my type structure agenda might take over,
Mm-hmm.
and then the only thing that I care about is where the juice is.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so
Uh-huh.
I meet this person as a therapist. I get the permission to explore the psychological space,
Mm-hmm.
and if there's a, if there's not a clear agenda on the part of the client, I'll use my own agenda as orientation,
Yeah.
and that is to get as much juice out of it as possible. And
What do you mean
that
by
means
juice?
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I yeah, that's a good question. I mean, when you see people's vulnerabilities, you see their, in some sense, you see their beauty,
Yeah.
because this fragility, this it matters how we treat each other. It matters whether we are careful, whether we are honest, whether we are mindful of the needs that everybody has. That matters. And I'm thinking about, somebody asked me, you know, we are vulnerable in spaces where it makes a difference whether we are treated with love or not.
Mm-hmm.
And this connection that comes up, that is possible when I see your vulnerability, and I notice that the way I treat you matters to you. That that nourishes my heart.
Hmm.
This mattering nourishes my heart, and
Oh, okay, yeah.
I put it next to the alternative um, of a world where people are numb and stabilize themselves by cutting things off, by dissociating. And in this world, this doesn't matter so much because people are numbed off and you cannot reach them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, But this connection where it matters how I treat somebody, that gives me juice, that gives me nourishment.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm looking for. But
Yeah.
the thing, when I don't have the agenda on my screen, what the other person is actually here for, and what the limitations are of what we just talked about, of this space, how much of themselves can they actually bear,
Yeah.
then I might go somewhere where they are not prepared to go. And
Yeah.
that's what I have to watch.
And what happens
Okay.
when, I mean, I don't know a lot of people that have the clarity or courage to be able to say what they need.
Right. And that is an issue,
Yeah.
but I've come to learn how to discern that there are unconscious agendas, and there are people who have no agenda or who are not ready for the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I discern that by feeling tension within myself. When you come into my practice and I notice there is an issue, I can feel it through a certain kind of vital tension that I
Mm-hmm.
can feel here in this space.
Sure.
And I might not know what it is. I usually don't, but I've come to trust this sense. Okay.
Okay.
And so when I tell people that I'm interested in why they are coming, then I also offer that it might be that they have no clue, but we can explore it together because, according to my sense, there is something there.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
um, and there are times where this is not the case. So it's not just my projection of there needs to be something so I can get to work, but there are times in which people um, well, it's like it feels flat. It feels like um, there is no, they're good, or they're not interested, or their aliveness is somewhere else,
Uh-huh.
on other topics or on practicing something. I mean,
Yeah.
this can happen after a while, after a good deal of therapy, and then we come to a plateau, and then we notice, okay, what we've been talking about is kind of resolved, and what's going on now, and oh, it's actually fine. We can stop here. So those are the possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
A- And now that I'm talking about it, I have another answer to your question, what I need to watch.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, Sometimes, or especially in the beginning of my practice, I noticed how I tended to use people for for evidence for my hope machine.
Wow. Okay. That sounds juicy. What do you mean?
Okay? I mean, I I so somebody comes in and it's a difficult situation, and there are a lot of traumatic backgrounds to it, and I try to prove to myself that this is not a hopeless case. And I do that actually to soothe myself,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because if I don't manage to resolve this case, whatever resolving means, but
Mm-hmm.
helping this person, then maybe my own situation as a child was hopeless too. And that cannot be. And I cannot accept that.
Oh, that's interesting. That's where you went. I was expecting it to be something like, if you can't resolve it, then it means your your mechanism doesn't work.
That's
Yeah.
a step in between, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my mechanism doesn't work, and therefore I cannot expect anybody's mechanism to work.
Yeah. Well, by mechanism, actually, what I'm meaning is,
You mean the type structure?
what I mean is your intervention strategy, like,
Okay.
which, by the way, I would in this context, given type 2 type structure, it's like that is you from the point of view of the type structure.
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
you're, you know,
Yeah, I don't work.
yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah,
And that's the
yeah,
heart center worthlessness feeling that pops up.
exactly.
Yeah.
Who am I if that doesn't work? Right.
Yes. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, and if that doesn't work, and that's, I think, behind the type structure,
Uh-huh.
is the experience of despair and hopelessness that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Um, and as a child, we don't have ideas about space and time and about change and about different circumstances. We don't know how to get different parents. We have to make this work how it is, and um, therefore, when something doesn't work, it feels like endless despair. And I think at the core of the type structure, it's always this. And I haven't thought it through for every type, but I find it a safe bet to say, okay, if my type structure fails, what remains? That's an interesting question.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. That's probably where we get into a territory of being really present, because then we can, okay, what comes up and what do we really have to deal with it when that fails.
Have you ever had a moment where you felt truly in contact with the essential quality of love or connection or however whatever word you'd put to it?
Yes, I have, and I would like to answer with two versions of that. There's one version where I have this this delusion of grandeur, of we could say being super Jesus.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. uh,
um, where I get a sense of this power of love
hmm
that is really there. The type structure of two, what it does is it represses everything else.
Uh-huh.
So when twos talk about loving somebody and actually doing this out of selflessness, they are usually honest.
Right. I love this point. Yeah.
Yeah, they are
Yeah.
honest because that's all they are aware of.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
And I think in our initial conversation, I talked about a client who's a two, where I could observe from a distance this split between image and what he's actually doing,
Totally.
because he was suffering from a divorce, and he was so disappointed that all his efforts for the family were not recognized,
hmm
and and he was insisting that this was all selfless, and at the same time he came up with moral indignation about this not being reciprocated.
hmm
In one half of the sentence, he said the one thing, and in the other half of the sentence, he said the other.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, what? What are you talking about? Don't you notice the contradiction? And he didn't. He really
Right.
didn't. He
Yeah.
was. It was like a split, and switching between the one and the other. So what the type structure does, it focuses yourself on the power of love, and that fuels the hope machine that I was talking about. And
Yeah.
you are really just connected to the impulse to serve and to nourish other people. That's all there is, and it's a beautiful state. Okay, it's something you can. That's why I use the word addiction. You can really be be intoxicated by that. And and with that state, I can get delusions of grandeur where I have the idea, okay, uh, all the stuff that I learned and that I found to be effective with other people, I will find the platform and I will pour it out to the world, and everybody will be happy and take it in, and this will be a merrier place to live. So these things have come up, and in
Yeah.
some sense, this can be used as a vision, and it can, it can be authentic, it can lead to somewhere, but it usually didn't, because my insecurities about being disturbed in this image were too great to actually try something. So it stayed it stayed that way. That is one version, and the other version, I would say, has happened when people really did see me and
Mm.
describe how they saw me in a way that encapsulated my vulnerability but also my strength.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And that's man, that's the reason to be here, I think.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing to hear that, and particularly after we had that whole conversation about what it takes for someone to penetrate through the
Exactly, yes.
membrane. And
Yes.
yeah. Hmm. Um, I've my experience of you as a human being is that you have remarkable ego transparency. Like you have you have this beautiful language, and the subject of your interior is object enough that you can sort of move it around and shape it and see it from other
Hmm.
angles.
Hmm.
What helped you? What has helped you with that? How did you arrive there?
I am forever grateful to Marshall Rosenberg, who
Mm-hmm.
founded nonviolent communication,
Yeah.
mainly because he gave me so much courage to actually get transparent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he and he comes from this stream of humanistic psychology, where others like Abraham Maslow or Fritz Perls or Carl Rogers also come from.
Yeah.
And and the hope and the courage that I gained from him was, however deep I go within myself, I may trust that there will be something reconciling coming up, something that is helping me love myself more. And I mean by that, not, flattering myself, but really loving myself in all the strengths and weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And and that is something that has been with me since then. And of course, in the first couple of years, that was more like a rumor to me. I
Mm-hmm.
really didn't know that this was true. I hope that he was right. And, for for a time, this was like kind of like a religion to me. You know,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
I also was a little bit fundamentalistic and trying to persuade people to treat me this way. And you
Yeah.
know look
I've been there.
here, this is
Yeah.
this is how you need to treat me, and other people too.
Yes.
And and
Uh, that's interesting. Real quick, that might be a social self pres thing too, or uh, in the sense of like these are the rules of engagement. This is how
right.
you do it. Here are
Yes.
the 10 Commandments.
Yes.
I can present the tablets to you. This is what it
Yes.
is. Yeah.
Yes.
So just to name that,
Yes.
but go ahead.
Yes. Yes, it could be. Yeah, it could be related to that. And
Yeah.
it's the hope is, you deal with it and then I'll feel better.
Uh huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, this is a childish point of view, and it is what a child actually needs from a parent.
Mm-hmm.
You deal with it, and I will feel better.
Yeah.
And
Uh huh.
one way to phrase what psychotherapy can do for us is to become our own mothers and fathers,
Mm-hmm.
to have the awareness that we would have needed from our parents for ourselves, so we can treat ourselves this way.
Yeah.
And so nonviolent communication and this consciousness helped me a lot.
Yeah.
And through the people who did that, I came to Ken Wilber and integral theory, and that helped me to understand differences better between levels of consciousness, but also between types. And the Enneagram came close to that because,
Yeah.
Ken Wilber also talks about types and as a fundamental metric of how to differentiate how people are, and and understanding where people come from is helpful to me, so that I do not take people's reactions personally and think that them not taking in what I have to offer is a reflection of my worth or value.
Yeah.
Um, so that helped too. And then I engaged in this program where I got my license as a therapist,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
and and because of the humanistic background of this institute, I felt right at home. I had no struggle to feel belonging there. I had the sense of, okay, we are all working on the same thing here, and we are more or less open to work with ourselves so we can become transparent to what's actually going on. And um, and within that program, I also had my own therapy, which continues on until today with a psychoanalyst. And uh, it's so amazing, In the beginning, I was way more in the image and in my head
Yeah.
about everything I was talking about. And throughout time, it became possible and easier to just be with my spontaneous emotions while I was in the therapy setting. But that was hard work to get there, because in the beginning I was way too scared to do that. I wouldn't actually have known how to open the membrane so this can come out. Mm,
That's a
and
profound
yeah,
thing to say right there, is the way that an image type and your language for it before was really profound too, just that there's an autonomous heart organ,
exactly.
separate
Yes,
from this very powerful filtration system that you have around, and
yes,
actually not more than filtration, it actually shapes your emotional life, is this image that the self image you have of
yes,
yourself, right? And so
yes,
to get in contact with a present moment emotional process, like any of the
yes,
process oriented therapies like parts work or
yeah,
focusing or somatic based or whatever, like to actually get in touch with what's quote unquote really going on,
all right,
outside of the purview of that image, that which
yeah,
is the way you constrain yourself. um, that feels like a very powerful intervention point, and it sounds like that was you experienced that in therapy doing that.
I did.
Yeah.
And my analyst, she's very patient
Uh-huh.
and very, she never pushed for anything. She's curious. She also asked me whether uh, what the parts of me are that do not trust her, or that are actually thinking, what would she do if I were to come out, beyond this filtration system,
Wow. Uh-huh.
if she were overwhelmed by that, or somehow insulted or offended in some way.
Uh-huh.
And uh, and to be able to talk about that allows me to just to be there without being vigilant of the result of what how I show up.
Yeah.
And this is probably a good description of an image type's proclivity: is
That was a
you're
beautiful. Yeah.
always
Yeah.
vigilant. You're
Yes.
always
Yeah.
vigilant. And even as we are talking right now, I am vigilant, yeah,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
of how the people who will watch this,
Uh-huh.
what kind of image they will create of me in their head, and whether this could be dangerous for me.
Yes. I have that too.
Yeah. I figured.
uh,
Yeah. And there's a perspective in which there there only needs to be one person who's hostile towards what I present here,
mhm.
and the whole world feels hostile to me. It's like there's a
Yeah.
all or nothing thing going on,
Uh-huh.
and it's hard to differentiate. Okay, how dangerous is this really? How what can I expect from just one person finding this stupid or arrogant or whatever might come up?
Mhm.
But a very young part in me doesn't differentiate that. It just
Yes.
says, "Fuck, it's dangerous. I need to shut up and shut
Yeah.
down."
Yeah.
You know.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Dude, I gotta say, it's amazing to me how much of this I'm relating to. It's like, I mean, the whole thing, the parts where you're speaking about specifically the two, is a little more distant from me, but I mean, our type structures are overlapping in a pretty significant way.
Hmm.
Also, social
Yes.
selflessness. I also have
Yes.
three, not well, I'm 396, and you have all three of those.
Yes.
You're Bermuda
Yes.
adjacent, basically, right? As a
Exactly. Yes. I'm a wobbly Bermuda.
yeah, yeah. But man, that whole thing of the the vigilance is such a beautiful word for this, and it's a word actually normally associated with six, but words have
Hmm.
slippery meaning when we talk about the inner world here.
Hmm.
There is
Hmm.
totally a vigilance when it comes to
Hmm.
image types, and I
Hmm.
experience that in a very profound way, and maybe even a hyper vigilance with the social dominant thing, because it's like,
Exactly.
I'm just reading like these very subtle micro expressions, or even, you know, a word in a sentence could be placed in a certain way, and I can be like, does that person like me or not like me?
Hmm.
Yeah, and that's all just happening at an unconscious level.
Hmm.
And there's something interesting too about what happens in when that settles down, like in moments of a conversation. I've experienced it here too, is just speaking with you
Hmm.
and being engrossed in the content and just experiencing your
Hmm.
energy and just being connected.
Hmm.
It's like some
Hmm.
of that dies down and
Exactly.
you
Yes.
enter a flow state, and that actually maybe is could be a definition of flow state for image types. Is like
Yes.
when you lose sight of the image,
Yes.
and the
Yes. I
vigilance
like that.
goes away. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. And it feels like, can I trust this flow
yeah.
enough that the rest doesn't matter anymore?
Hmm.
And when that happens, then I'm in a good connection.
Right.
In a situation like this, where there's a publicity to it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I'm just talking one on one, of course, the space that I have to survey is way more limited, and then it's easier to trust that this is okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
I have one more concrete question around image. This conversation is making me think about image slightly differently, or at least or have a more nuance to it. Like, I think the word image evokes like a picture or a portrait or a frame or something, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a sense of an image type, just the language. um it's like there's a way that I think somehow in my head I've been trying to square, like, people have a specific image that they're trying to attend to or prop up or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
partly what I'm getting is that there is specificity, but also the image, and maybe I'm speaking as a Bermuda type here, but there's a way that the image is not actually in high resolution or definition in my head, but there's a way that if someone's response to me could, let me say it this way, it's very easy for me to sense when someone's response to me um, threatens the image or doesn't like the image. But if you ask me to define the image, it'd be very difficult.
Yes.
And I'm curious if you relate to that, and it'd be interesting actually to speak. I'd love to do an image type panel, actually, just to have that conversation. That's an interesting
Yes.
whole
Yes, that would be
thing.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Um, you at one point you mentioned the question, how is two not an attachment type?
yeah.
And um, part of my own answer to that is the image of two is specific to being loving.
Yes. Okay. That makes sense.
And I don't think that's the case for 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It could be for 3, but only within a context that values being loving.
Yes. That's yes. That's the
Okay?
shiftiness. Yeah, that makes sense.
So the context dependency is specific to attachment types.
Yeah.
And for me, I as a 2 experience this in every context. There is not a context in which I would not want to appear as somebody who is maybe, let's say, I mean, I like the image of a psychotherapist because, I provide something and I'm deep, hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some wisdom to it. There's some interesting discourse. There's heartfelt connection. There's depth. Um, and I can help other people to discover those qualities within themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my profession really matches the image quite well.
Oh,
But there are parts of my profession that don't work quite well with that image. For example, I need money.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And sometimes, when patients forget to pay me and then they come and pay me and I said, "Oh, come on, I don't do this for the money." And of course, this is self-ironic because
Yeah.
I mean, I fucking need it anyway,
Uh,
but it's not part of the image, okay?
yeah. Yeah.
And there are a couple of other things. I need to write reports, for example, and I have a very hard time doing that because I do not get the juice out of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 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 I also have to get into a position that might not be at all loving. It might be more judging and more, how do I think will this go? And maybe I could come to the conclusion that this is a hopeless case and I cannot help them and I do not want to deal with them,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's too difficult and I have enough troubles in my private life.
Mm-hmm.
So all these things don't quite fit into the 2 image,
Yes.
and I have trouble admitting those to myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a moment when I'm overwhelmed or when I'm less conscious, it might happen that I go along with stuff that I shouldn't go along with, just because they cater to my 2 image.
Yeah.
And so, this is, I think, is specific. And when I get into a different context, like a party, for example, then I do not adapt to what they find valuable. I only start to open up when the context in which what I have to offer is does appear as valuable. Then I start to talk. So
Uh-huh.
usually
Yes.
parties are, I do not like them usually because the inner life isn't the usual topic on parties.
Yes.
You know,
Tell me
I
about
mean, there
it.
are people, there are hippies, for example, who go onto uh, um, tantric community events or something, and they like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's where I like to be because then I don't have to work for this context to appear.
Mm-hmm.
But if it isn't there, I usually remain silent
Right.
and just withdraw a little. And okay, I don't want to impose myself here
Yeah.
because that's, of course, this has happened too, that I imposed myself and that wasn't pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could, juice up my image, but and feel secure within the social context.
Yeah.
And so not to do that means I remain silent and wait till something comes up.
Yeah. Although that itself is, first of all, social dominant awareness and also
Mhm.
possibly the Bermuda adjacent trifix. I mean, if
Yes,
your trifix was different, you might be more willing to impose yourself or be less sensitive.
yes, yes, yes. For
Yeah.
yeah, if
Yeah.
there would be an 8 in it,
Yeah,
or
yeah. But
7, 8, 7, 2. Yeah.
you're saying
Hmm.
in the same in this, there's a kind of reciprocal to, so there are parts of your therapy profession that don't fit the image, but at the same time, being a therapist, um, outside in the world, is its own image.
Right.
Um, and you touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious about, like, have you found yourself accidentally in situations where you find yourself slipping into therapy mode before it's wanted, or you find yourself offering it to people kind of accidentally?
Yes, all the
Yeah.
time.
And by the way, I,
um,
I relate to that actually myself as a coach, but it's off
yeah.
the three. Well, anyway, but yeah, I'm curious from the two point of view.
The the thing is, um, there were times where I was quite desperate about this, because it is, you might say it's therapy mode, but to me it feels like I'm following the flow. I'm following the interest here.
Yeah.
You tell me something, and then I want to know precisely what you mean. And the first question towards this precision could already be construed as therapy mode,
That's a
just
good
because
point.
I was
That's a good point.
interested,
Yeah. Yeah.
And um, the what's probably a good way to protect myself and others from that is to check whether the person's own awareness is broad enough right now to carry the topic that we're talking about.
Hmm.
So you could
Yeah.
probably ask me, like you are doing now. You ask me about things that are quite deep, but my awareness is broad enough to hold it. So
Yeah.
you don't have to be afraid that I fall apart while you follow your interest.
Yeah. And there's obviously a receptivity to those questions in this context.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So
And the
capacity and
context is all
receptivity. Yeah.
the context has already set the mm, the boundaries and the purpose of why we are talking about this.
Yeah.
And this kind of orientation is already, you know it's also, it's reassuring.
Yeah.
And in a party context, this is different. We have not set those purposes and boundaries,
Right.
and then this can derail a conversation or something.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we haven't talked about or touched on with the two that you want to bring up?
Hmm. I still feel some juice about this thing um, that I mentioned before. That twos are honest but unaware of what's beyond this idea of love.
Okay.
And because I relate to the experience of being accused of manipulating,
Yeah. Huh.
I recall a time at which mm, I made a really thoughtful birthday present to a woman that I was interested in, and she had kept her distance. And um, and when I had found the idea of what I would like to give to her, I felt this kind of intoxication, and I felt this, oh shit, yeah, great, I found it, now I got her. Now she won't have any choice but to open her legs and her heart, and you know and and it's so crazy to remember how convinced I was of the lovingness of this.
Yeah.
And then I gave the presents to her, and at first she was delighted, and then she noticed, shit, something feels off. And what I got to understand, not right away, at first I was just hurt and embarrassed and all that. And I what I understood was that the reason this feels terrible to people, or can feel terrible to people, is that I give so much love into the relationship and force the other person into a position where, for reciprocity to occur, this person would have to do the same.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the other person isn't ready to do that for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So, me not taking care or not being aware of this kind of imbalance
Yeah.
puts the other person on the spot, and that doesn't feel good generally.
Right.
It's a pressure.
Yes.
Okay?
Pressure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And from within the type 2 structure, this pressure feels like security
The pressure that you're putting, or the pressure that they feel, or
that
both.
they feel. Because, without the awareness,
There you go.
without imagining, okay, how would I like to be pressured into reciprocating?
Uh-huh.
Without that awareness, this feels like, okay, now I got something on you. It feels like leverage.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, this is the
Okay?
2 line to 8, you might say, or yeah,
Exactly.
this is
Exactly.
amazing. Uh-huh.
Yes. And I will never, I mean, within the type structure, it would be difficult to impossible to conceptualize this as leverage, because leverage is the opposite of being loving. That doesn't work, Yeah.
Yeah.
As an 8, you might be able to sell that to yourself because
Yes.
you're the boss, and you know what you're doing, and but as a 2, this you have to hide that from yourself.
Yes.
But you do it anyway because it feels like the only thing that guarantees that people stick around.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Because if we could recall, the 2 does not believe in real love and connection to carry such an interaction. So
Uh-huh.
we have to offer something,
Yeah.
and this offering needs to lead to an experience of I have to reciprocate so that it works.
Yeah.
Okay, and this interaction and this mechanism is not conscious, and that's why 2s are honest when they say they do it out of selfless reasons. And at the same time, I think in our initial conversation I told you how creepy 2s can seem to me, and
Yeah.
they seem creepy because of this. They
That's right.
seem creepy because they
Yeah.
put you in this position where they have leverage on you, and they don't even admit to it. And you have to find this out for yourself so you can actually name it and say, I do not want this.
Hmm.
I want a reciprocal relationship in which we follow the flow of what occurs naturally, and not because there is an idea of how this should go and how this should be, where I, as the counterpart, I play a role that you have assigned me. I do
Hmm.
not want that. That is
Yeah.
what's creepy about 2s.
Yes, this is super vivid and high resolution how you're describing this. And it really, I mean, for me, excuse me, it brings up the point or the question around what it really takes for a 2 to see this, or what it, the the sequence of inner work or development for a 2 feels like. You have to, I mean, just having this put in your face, like if someone were to name it, be like, hey, I see this, you're doing this, or I don't feel comfortable here. That It's like there's no place for that to exist in the 2 psyche unless they've
Exactly. Yes.
cultivated enough capacity to see themselves that it can land
Yeah.
somewhere, you know.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and that's fascinating to me. And so,
Yeah.
from the point of view of inner work, or like the first leverage points in a two's inner work, um, I guess it brings up a question for me, like what do you do, or what motivates it to do inner work, um and what's that first piece that gets, I don't know, awakened or something like that.
Well, this experience that I just related was this woman was important enough to me and still is that I had to figure this out.
Yeah, you had to figure it
I
out.
had
Yeah.
I had to figure out why she reacted this way and why this didn't work.
So the question arose in you: why didn't this work?
Why didn't this work?
Yeah.
And at this point I didn't know about the two yet, but
Uh
when I discovered it, I recalled that this fit perfectly
huh.
into what the two type 2 structure does.
Yeah.
And but she was she has been both nourishing my heart. She kind of went behind the membrane,
Okay.
um, because is she is so transparent to me that I can feel her heart almost instantly,
Okay.
and uh, that is that is an incentive,
Yeah, it's
to
attractive. Right. Yeah.
it's very attractive. How get I to connect with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And um, and she gave me constantly feedback when I was off. She rejected everything that didn't come from here.
Wow, that's amazing. Uh huh.
Okay,
Yeah.
and you can imagine how painful that was at
I can
times.
only imagine. Yeah.
She withdrew sometimes, and she was not available, and she didn't explain things to me
Mm-hmm.
because she had her own issues. And but she rejected everything that didn't come from here
Mm-hmm.
and stayed interested anyway.
That's like a major statement that you just made right there. And she stayed interested anyway.
And she stayed interested, yes.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I stayed interested too. I think I have a lot to thank for in this relationship, that helped me bring this out.
Wow.
And
Uh,
and it looked at times to be fruitless and hopeless, and why do I care anymore? But this point of who am I here, and why does she get behind the membrane, and what is she referring to when she rejects something and when she accepts something? That's what I wanted to figure out.
right.
And
Yeah.
because there was so much juice and vitality to it.
Mm-hmm.
So so that was the incentive. And then, I mean, I have my different tools that I mentioned. I have my own psychotherapy, and I I could also figure out the the relationship between what's happening here and what happened with my parents and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think at a certain point, of course, like you just implied, this kind of confrontation would have been too much.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I because the whole self-image is rests upon this idea of, if I am loving enough,
Mm-hmm.
eventually the thing I need will come about.
Right.
And if you take that away from me, then there's just only hopelessness left.
Right. Right.
And that's unacceptable, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Even if I were to recognize this to be true, I wouldn't be able to live with it. So at a certain stage of my development, this would have been the case.
Right.
And
Right.
then if somebody would have said that to me, I might have left and dismissed the person in some
Mm-hmm.
way, you know.
Yeah. Um, This is amazing. This conversation is really, really amazing. It's clarified so much for me in terms of the two. And yeah, I find your language around the stuff to be so accessible. So I just really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you sharing. Yeah.
Thank you.
What's this like for you? What has this been like for you to have this conversation?
Juicy, because I feel the two of us have been in the same space of exploration and excitement. And I notice the difference between the recording and how we do it privately
Yeah.
is very well framed with the vigilance. I feel that too.
Interesting. Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, and that is always something that I need to be aware of when I do something publicly, so
Hmm.
I can still stay centered.
Yeah.
And but it's fun. It's great. It's on the edge of what I'm exploring myself, and I am grateful for your questions and being able to make this contribution.
Cool. Well, thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to release this and have people learn from it.
Yes, me too.